poetry and the word and theater and dance, certainly music in a cacophonous, to a cacophonous degree. And it's large, everything about it is just enormous. But I find it quite overwhelming in many ways. My first time at the opera was when I was very, very young. I do not know why or how I got there, but it was in the old Metropolitan New York before the Lincoln Center building. And I think that I was the guest of a family whose interest in the opera was well practiced and well honed, and they thought that even a young farm boy like myself should be exposed to all of this, and that was that. As time went on, as some of you know, I was the minister in a church, a congregational church in Connecticut, and among our parishioners was a remarkable woman whom everyone adored, and for good reason, because she was really a lovely person. We'll call her Anna Conroe. Her late husband was a contractor, a builder, devoted to her. She had come from money, as it were. As we say in New England, he married well, and had a wonderful construction company, and so devoted to her, and particularly appreciated the fact that she liked shore birds. And from the time that she was a young girl, she was very much fond of birds. And one thing led to another. And in their marriage, he had the means by which to construct and to build a lovely home right on the sound of Connecticut, looking out over the ocean. And it was a lovely rise with all manner of pools below it, natural pools where birds just congregated. And it was my responsibility and joyful duty to call upon Anna during my tenure of 25 years there. She was not well physically and pretty much confined to a wheelchair. But one of her great joys was not just the birds that she could observe from great, enormous windows that he had planned for the southern view, but in their music room, where there was a fine stereophonic setup there that he had also designed because she had, from the time that she was a girl and from her mother, learned and appreciated about the opera. And she had a whole, just shelf and shelf and shelf of broadcasts of the opera on recording. And when I first called on her, it was a very formal affair, and she was quite gracious and wanted to entertain me. And she had arranged for her housekeeper to have a very lovely tea set up in the music room. And she wanted me, assuming that I was as much an aficionado of the opera as she might be, to hear one of her favorite performances. On 78 records, mind you, not the number, but that's the revolutions per minute. And indeed, 3.5 hours of, I mean, this is a long, long and arduous. But on subsequent occasions, we would, and I would make sure that I had the time in a long afternoon and convinced her that only a small portion of the opera that we would enjoy, not the entire thing. And so this went on for several years. Fast forward to the happy fact that another family in our church, also opera fans, had a regular subscription, and they had 2 tickets to the opera, but were not able to use them on a particular occasion because they were to be out of the country, and graciously offered them to me so that Janet and I could enjoy this rather festive occasion in their stead. Darien, Connecticut is about an hour out of New York, the kind of community that God would have done if she'd had the money. And a number of people go into the city quite often, to the theater, to concerts, and to the opera. And many of our parishioners did. Well, it was a great treat to have these tickets. And I came home and told Janet of this, and Janet reminded me that as a professional social worker, she had a conference that she had to attend. It was going to be on that particular day and night, and so therefore could not accompany me, but I should still invite somebody else. And and a thought occurred to me. I should ask Anna Conroe to go with me as my guest, because surely she will say no because she is confined to a wheelchair, hasn't been to the opera for years, and then I can ask somebody who really, it might be more enjoyable to go with. I confess that. And so I thought it would also give me some points with the other ladies of the church if I asked Anna, which I did. And I was astonished and somewhat surprised and a little bit taken back by the fact that she enthusiastically said, oh, she would very much like to be my guest. And she hadn't been to the opera for years, and she would like very much to go. And how should we arrange this? Well, I was taken back by that, but once you've asked, there you are. And I said, well, we'll make arrangements as we must, and we'll drive in, and so and so and such, and whatever. And I got the word now from various ladies in the church, how they all buzz and whatever, that Anna was just delighted by this invitation, and that she'd asked that one of her children to go to the storage unit to get one of her special frocks, out and have it fetched up and for the evening. And she was looking forward to. Well, that meant that, of course, I had to be gussied up too. And then it occurred to me, I didn't know it, but I was told this was the opening night of the opera season. And on such an occasion, people do dress in a grand way, and most men wear black tie. And so, of course, I had to wear my tuxedo, which was amazing. I had this from college, and it's amazing if you've worn a tuxedo, you know that over the years it tends to get a little smaller with age all the time. And so, I thought, okay, I can squeeze myself, tie myself into this tuxedo, and that will be fine. But now there was another problem because of Anna's wheelchair. My car would probably not accommodate that. But again, other friends in the church said, oh, this is such a grand occasion that you're going to the opera with Anna. I have a little larger car. You can borrow my car for the evening. And so it was all set. There's no way to get out of it. There you were. So the arrangements were made, and Anna said, I do want you to come by early so we can have a leisurely drive in and have plenty of time. And I said, that's fine. We would like at 4 o'clock. I mean, that's, whatever. So I came to get her at 4 o'clock. And lo and behold, the housekeeper greeted me at the door and ushered me in. And Anna had laid a formal tea in the music room so that we would have sustenance to deal with what was going to be a lengthy evening, to be sure. And so we enjoyed that, and then got her into the car and folded the wheelchair and got that in the back of the car and drove in as we did. And also tipped off as the arrangement that I would have to make. I had registered for a special parking place for handicap parking. And as we drove into Lincoln Center, you go subterranean, twists around, whatever, and come up in this special spot. And lo and behold, there was a place with our name on it, right by the door underground. And there was a gentleman in a maroon jacket, looking very, very smart. And as soon as we drove in, he greeted Mrs. Conroe by name, whom he recognized from years that he had worked there and her many times before. And he had a more, not more fashionable, but a more suitable wheelchair already, and assisted her to get into the wheelchair. And I just sort of followed along, and in we went, and then finally into the grand foyer, and then into the orchestra itself. And we were, I think, back in the 20th row or something, center of the orchestra. I can't imagine what these tickets must have cost, but being opening night, it was a very, very gay and exciting affair, and everyone dressed out in such a way. And only then, as we're going down the aisle and into the row, it occurred to me, good Lord, this opera is going to be about 3.5 hours long. And what if Mrs. Conroe, she is, let's face it, to be blunt, what if nature, just make well, about that time, Behind me, a lovely African-American lady dressed in black with a little, not a bonnet, but sort of a nurse's cap kind of thing, and ruffled sleeves on her black dress, tapped me on the shoulder and gave me a card. And she said, "Oh, Dr. Evans, should you have any need of my assistance during the course of the evening, just please just hold your hand up with this card and I will assist you in every way." Well, that solved that problem. So we got ourselves settled. And as you know, the opera begins with the lights coming down from the ceiling, which is about 500 stories high, and they come down in 60 seconds, and they come down, and then they go back up again and fade, and it's all dark, and then the great curtains open, and the overture begins, and whatever. And she was just so excited; it was wonderful. It was the Marriage of Figaro, and it's only going to be a lighter evening than nothing too heavy, but still just as long. And there were two intermissions, and fortunately, this lady who had volunteered to assist, I say volunteer, she was one of the staff and did so excellently, and that was fun. And we had a wonderful, wonderful evening at the opera. In the same way, exiting, the gentleman who'd helped us in helped to get her up the aisle and to our car, and well settled her in her car. Mrs. Conroe, it was a lovely occasion to have you back again, and we hope there will not be such a long delay before your next visit, and sent us on our way. And so it's now about 1:30 in the morning, and I'm a farm boy who goes to bed early and gets up early, but it's you've got to hang with it. And so it's now about an hour and a half or so back to home, and we drive into her driveway, and I get out the wheelchair, and I think, okay, fine, I'll make sure that she's well settled in the house, and then I can go home and finally collapse after this exhaustive evening. And as I get her inside the door, lo and behold, she gestures to the music room and said, "Ronald," we're now on a first name basis, of course. "Ronald, would you please do me the favor? When my late husband and I returned from the opera on so many occasions, we made it a practice to have a nightcap. Will you please join me with a nightcap?" And so it was a good, hearty scotch that was there. And then, lo and behold, again, her lovely housekeeper, who had been waiting the whole evening, came and ushered her away, and I drove off. Would you like a nightcap? A night at the opera. It was for me a memorable evening, one that I will never forget, partly because, though that was many years ago, I think that evening was almost as long as the years in between. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Ron. That's a wonderful story. That's great. And now I understand you may have to leave, and that's fine whenever you have to. Okay, so I got an email from Adrian, and she said she didn't receive the email. I checked my email and I sent it, so she must have an overactive spam filter that didn't let her see it. So I replied with the link, but that may be blocked also. So I don't know if she'll make it. Okay, so who would like to be next? Oh, well, I think Nick raised.
Before Walter jumps in, and he should, I just wanted to give a wave. I don't see her, but I know that Virginia Stark is there, and we're all very fond of her.
Yes,
And
yes.
she too is a wonderful musician, organist, and aficionado of all wonderful concerts. So we can't see you, and maybe you can or cannot see us, Virginia, but just love to you. We're just waving. There you are. Sorry, Walter, wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think Virginia can see us, but she has no microphone and no camera. So that's why. All right.
Nick, you go first.
All right. Well, I was going to tell a completely different story, but after that story of Ron, I have to tell this one because you need to know why so many Caltech students are afraid of the opera. And it's because, well, first you have to understand, as a kid, the opera, I heard the opera music, but I actually heard it more in comedic settings than in a theater setting. For instance, so much operatic music is used in musical comedies or in cartoons. And so I knew the tunes, but I didn't know the words to them because, of course, they don't use the original words. Once I got to Caltech, though, I learned about a very unusual tradition there involving a piece of operatic music. You see, for reasons going way back into the distant past, and I mean possibly as far back as World War II or even earlier, Wagner's The Ride of the Valkyries music has been played there 3 times a year. Well, actually, more than 3 times a year, 3 weeks a year. During finals week, early in the morning in finals week, each morning of finals week. And in the old days, when this depended on simple phonographs, you would hear the Ride of the Valkyries coming down the hall, and it wasn't so bad. It would act as an alarm clock, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. But as technology improved, and Caltech students being Caltech students, they had to go with the state of the art in reproducing music. And the 2 times that I remember, no, 3 times, because there were really 3 that I really remember the most. The first was while I was there, someone got the great idea of making a polite request that of KUSC, the classical music station. And would it be possible for them to play as a special request from Caltech, The Ride of the Valkyries at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning? And they specified the Monday morning, of course. And then everyone in the student house that I was in. Now, here I have to explain something. The student houses at Caltech are not like dormitories in the normal sense. Imagine high-tech versions of the houses at Hogwarts in the Harry Potter stories, because they're very much based on English school houses. You have less than 100 people in each one. You have a certain camaraderie, a personality that can change over time, symbols, all sorts of history. So it just so happened that everyone in the house I was in turned on their FM radios and turned on their stereo systems and cranked up the sound rather loudly that morning, so that at 7 o'clock, all of them played Ride of the Valkyries from the KUSC signal. But that wasn't good enough. The next time this was done, people figured that was pretty good, but it depended too much on KUSC. And what if they changed their mind about playing it? Or what if they got delayed? What if the signal was weak? So we have to do something like that even bigger. And people spent months working out how to hardwire every room in that house that had a working stereo system so that a signal created from one machine could be amplified in each of the rooms that had windows facing the adjacent house. Now, you have to understand that the rivalries existed between these houses, but between these houses there was also a courtyard with very reflective surfaces, lots of windows, lots of walls. And so if you pumped amplified music into that space, you would get the most amazing reverberations and echoes. And the victims in the opposing house would be the first victims, but then the cannon burst of acoustic energy shooting out the end toward the people in that direction would be a wonder to behold. And so, of course, we had to do it just to see what would happen. 7 o'clock that morning, there's this sort of click as the phonograph turns in, because we actually had phonograph records playing these for this, because it had to be done with proper tradition. And the Ride of the Valkyries rose to its great crescendo. And for the first time ever, they had a sequel to it, because after the Ride of the Valkyries, they went into something that had been a pop song on the radio, a rock song, Fire by Arthur Brown Jr., that bursts out with the words, "I am the god of hellfire and I bring you fire." And he begins to sing at that point. And so everyone who had tried to sleep through the Ride of the Valkyries found themselves listening to something even louder, because we had cranked that up to 11 on all of the systems. Well, that was the second really memorable Ride of the Valkyries episode. But a few years later, it went outside the atmosphere. Because you see, one of the astronauts that was going to be in space at the appropriate time to coincide with the finals week had been a student at Caltech. And so someone somehow convinced the appropriate people at NASA and JPL that it would be really nice and really friendly and a great memory for this person to have that as his wake-up music while he was in orbit, because it would harken back to his days at Caltech. Some of the people at JPL got the joke, the others didn't and agreed to it. So they actually set it up so that an astronaut in space was awakened to the music he would have been awakened by at 7 o'clock in the morning during finals week during his time at Caltech. That one actually involved the use of more energy than even the one where we used the reverberations, but he was definitely surprised to be awakened by the Ride of the Valkyries in space. He thought he had long gotten away from that tradition. And of course, the people from JPL weren't going to spoil the surprise. But anyway, if you see people from Caltech who kind of cringe every time a Wagnerian theme comes on, that's really why. Because there's this just sort of a flashback of, oh no, I didn't know it was finals week. And years afterwards, I can listen to most operas without that cringe effect. I mean, Marriage of Figaro, things like that, not a problem. But there's just something about Wagner's music that I don't own a single copy of any of his operas. And there's cause.
All right, that's amazing. So Ron's story made you remember that, huh?
Yes.
Thank you. That was wonderful. And hi, Adrian. Sorry you didn't get the email. I sent it to you. You need to check your spam blocker.
Yeah, it occurred to me that that might be where it ended up, but I did a search through all my folders and it didn't pop up. So I'll double check and see what happened. So
and I sent a reply right away as soon as I got your message.
Yeah.
But you didn't come on until just a few minutes ago, because then I thought, well, if it blocked the first one, it'll probably block this one. So I went to a different account and sent it from there, which apparently wasn't.
Yeah, no, so awesome. I appreciate it. I'm not sure what's going on. I've been having some issues with the tutoring platform that I'm teaching on, and it's changing things in my virtual network privacy settings. And so I have a feeling that might have done something funky, but anyway, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So our next storyteller will be Walter Roth.
Just before Walter starts, this is a silly question, but Adrian, are you still logged on to your VPN?
It's on right now, yes.
That could be the problem, because that actually interferes with a lot of stuff while you're on, because we have that at the library and we've discovered the most bizarre things happen. What you need to do is occasionally turn it off and then check what changes in your email.
No, it goes off whenever I put the computer to sleep or when I close it. I have to fire it up every time. The tutoring platform that I'm on, it turns out there's either hackers connected to it or there's some other weird malware,
Oh,
and it was causing some problems with my computer, so I had to start using my VPN. So, yeah, no, I appreciate that though. Thank you.
okay, Walter, your turn.
Okay. Oh, and I didn't get an email either, or at least I didn't see one. But had saved the connection from the last time, and I looked it up on the old emails, and then I just saved it as a Word document, and then I just click on it, and it seems to function just fine.
Well, that's very interesting because I thought I generated a new link. When you have a Zoom account, you can make it a recurring thing and it'll use the same link every time, but I don't do that.
Oh, well, I used the exact same link that I had before on the last one.
I'll have to go back and look and see.
Yeah, because I checked all the various emails and each one had a different Zoom link. So I didn't think about checking April's, but
Huh.
sounds like it worked for Walter.
Anyway,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it worked.
it worked. Okay, this is my version of a short story written by William Sidney Porter. He always wrote under the pen name of O. Henry. He actually was born, I think, right after the Civil War, and the story was published in 1907, and it's called The Last Leaf. Joanna was a young lady who had grown up in a small, isolated Midwestern town. She always had gone by the nickname of Johnsy, and from an early age, people recognized that she was quite good at drawing. Her teachers and her friends and family all encouraged her, and she got better and better as she got older. She was essentially self-taught. She went to the library and checked out books on drawing. She drew pictures of various things around in her town, people, barns, houses, people, faces. And by the time she was an adult, old enough to leave school, she was determined that she was not going to stay in that town. And she was not going to be a farmer's wife. She wasn't going to take a job as a clerk in a store, or the worst thing she could think of, have to work in a restaurant as a waitress. She was going to be an artist, which in those days was quite an unusual thing. She was determined to go to the big city, but she needed some money. And the only thing she could do to raise some money was to be a waitress in a local restaurant. But as soon as she had enough money, she went to New York City. But she soon found out that you can't just step off the train and earn a living by selling your drawings. So she had to go back to becoming a waitress in a restaurant. But it wasn't too long before she met somebody at the restaurant who became her bosom buddy, and her name was Susan. Susan also had come from a small town, but in upstate Maine. She also wanted to be an artist and couldn't support herself that way, but she had succeeded in becoming the very next best thing. She worked as a sketch artist for the newspaper. She drew pictures of the latest fashions for advertising in the newspaper. And she was succeeded in getting Johnsy a job in the newspaper doing the very same thing. And she invited her to come her and share an apartment with her. It was called a studio apartment, but it was really a lot more like an attic with a big window that was a studio. The window had a wonderful view of the brick wall of the building across the alley. That's all you could see. The only thing interesting about it, aside from the crumbling bricks, was a vine. A very old vine of some sort had been growing up the side of the building and had crept up and nearly covered the wall. And when the wind blew, you could see the leaves rustling, and that was about the only thing interesting out of that window. She also enjoyed the people who lived in that building. It happened to be right in Greenwich Village, which was the center of the artistic world in New York City at that time. And the building was full of all kinds of interesting people. There were dancers and singers, musicians, writers, vaudeville performers, all kinds of interesting people lived in this building. But one of the most interesting and certainly most mysterious people in this building was an old German immigrant. Easily, he was the oldest person in the building. He had this huge gray beard, and his name was Heimlich. Heimlich actually was a well-trained artist. He had been a graduate of a prestigious conservatory in Europe, and in his early days was a successful artist and even had private showings and had managed to sell quite a number of his paintings. But at this stage of his life, he was actually making a living being the custodian of this building. The reason is because, well, the way he put it was, he was not going to sacrifice his or compromise his artistic integrity for materialistic gain, which is a way of saying he was too stubborn. What he wanted to do was paint what he wanted to paint, the way he wanted to paint it, and that wasn't the way the public wanted. So he didn't sell very many paintings, but that was okay with him. He kind of enjoyed being the custodian, and he took care of his building very well. A lot like a mother hen takes care of her chicks. He looked after everybody, and he was very popular. And people would tease him good-naturedly about his paintings. They would say things like, well, Heimlich, did you sell any paintings today? And he would say, no, not yet, not today, but someday. You would just wait. I said, I make a masterpiece, a masterpiece. And nobody believed him. But he was a good guy with a big heart. John C. and Susan had a great time together. They didn't have very much money, but they enjoyed each other's company and they enjoyed their jobs, which weren't exactly artists, but it was pretty close. This lasted all through spring and summer. However, when fall came, also came the cold weather. It was cloudy and damp and windy, and people started getting sick. It was first just the ordinary sicknesses, colds and flus and so forth, but then came pneumonia. And it started out small and then it started spreading until it was a citywide epidemic. And in 1907, pneumonia was a deadly disease. There were no cures and there were no effective treatments. So every day when they came home on the streetcar or walked down the sidewalk, they would see the men in their crisp white suits carrying out the victims of pneumonia on stretchers, taking them away. This was quite a sobering and frightening sight for these two young girls. And then it happened. John C. came home from work one day and she was so exhausted, she went straight to bed without eating anything. Then in the wee hours of the morning, she woke up with a raging fever. And then the next day, the cough began. And she just continued to get worse and worse. But one of the hardest things for her was her attitude. It was very difficult for her to fight the melancholy. Leaving her family behind at first was quite exciting. She loved the freedom and the independence. But now that she was sick and that Susan was gone at work all day, she felt extremely lonely and missed her family very much. She really had nothing to do all day except stare out the window, looking at that wall and that vine, which now was turning fall colors. This happened for about 2 weeks. She kept getting sicker and sicker, and her attitude became worse and worse. Then one day when Susan came home, John C. told her something that made Susan's blood just run cold. She said, "You know, I've been watching that vine out the window all these days. And when I first got sick, the wall was covered with so many leaves I couldn't even count them. And as the wind blows and the leaves begin to fall, there's fewer and fewer. I counted them. There were 50 just a few days ago. And then there was 25. And then I counted them today. There's 7 leaves left. And you know, I know what's happening. When that last leaf falls from that vine, that's the day I'm going to die." And Susan was in a panic. She tried to talk her out of this. She's told her it was nonsense. It was ridiculous. That's just a plant outside on a wall in an alley. Don't pay any attention to that. But she was convinced that when that last leaf fell, she was going to die. Susan took out her little secret hoard of money that she had been saving, and she got a doctor to come. The doctor examined Susan and said there was nothing he could do. But she was young and she could possibly recover. Her life hung in the balance. He said, she's lost the will to live, and that could make the difference between life and death. And after the doctor left, Susan did everything she could to encourage her, but John C. was hearing none of it. So Susan went down to the basement where Heimlich had his little room. She knocked on the door and she got him to come up. He was like a father figure to them. He came in and did his best to tell her that that was craziness, nonsense. You can't believe such a thing. But she, even Heimlich, couldn't convince her. Then he tried his best convincer that he could think of. He said, I've told you that I'm going to paint a masterpiece. You must live to see my masterpiece. You cannot die. And then he left, and he wasn't sure if that was going to make any difference or not. But that evening, the sky got very gray and dark, and the first truly winter storm was blowing in. It was one of those evenings where you just want to come in, wrap yourself up in a blanket, sit in front of a fireplace, and drink hot tea. Susan was frantic. She figured that with this storm coming, there wasn't any way that those leaves were going to stay on that vine, and that if John C. looked out the window and saw that there were no leaves, she might just give up and die. She pulled the curtains shut tight, and she stayed up all night with her. The two of them stayed up all night, listening to the wind rush outside the alley. The next morning, John C. wanted to open up the curtain and see if the leaves were left. But Susan would not open the curtains. She says, no. It doesn't make any difference whether they're there or not. You know, it's just foolishness. But she was insistent. So Susan figured she can't leave them closed forever. She'll have to face it at some point. So she opened up the curtains. And there, on the vine, was clearly a leaf. And when John C. saw it, she was just delighted. And it was like a tonic, like a miracle tonic. She suddenly just felt she was going to recover. It seems that the superstition that led her to believe that the last leaf falling would kill her worked just as well in reverse. That the fact that the leaf stayed on and could withstand that terrible storm meant that she too was going to survive and weather her storm, her illness, and recover. Susan stayed with her for another couple of days. She didn't go out, and she steadily got better and better. She got anxious to go down and tell Heimlich the good news. So she went downstairs, knocked on the door, but he wasn't in. He didn't answer. So she went around to the different tenants and she asked, "Have you seen Heimlich?" And one of the tenants said, "Didn't you hear?" "No, I didn't hear. He died last night." She could hardly contain the tears. "Heimlich dead? How could that be? What happened?" The tenant said, "Well, the crazy old fool. It seems, well, you remember the storm the other night, that terrible storm? Well, he was out in it. He was in the alley, up on a ladder with a lantern, getting soaking wet with his paints. Nobody knows what he was doing out there, but he got soaking wet, got a terrible chill, and he got the pneumonia and died." And Susan stood there choking back the tears, and she said to herself, "I guess Heimlich painted his masterpiece after all." And Johnsy lived to see it.
All right, that's wonderful. I think you told that story up on a mule pack trip too.
I did.
Yeah, I liked it just as much then too. That's a great story. Fantastic story. And the name of the author, he went by O. Henry?
The author was O. Henry.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Adrian or Barbara, do either of you two have a story? Not Barbara. Adrian, do you have a story?
Well, okay, so I have one, but is it okay if I read it to you? I had a country western song of a week. I had money stolen, I injured my knee, my car won't start. If I had a dog and a boyfriend, they'd either leave me or die. So I didn't get a chance to memorize it, but is it okay if I read it?
That's okay with me.
Okay. I've been telling friends, it's like, my life is a country western song right now. So this last week has been pretty awful. But it's fitting that this is a story, Fairy Gifts. It comes from the, whoops, where's the cover? A Treasury of Best Loved Fairy Tales. This is from the Green Fairy book, which I've told stories out of this previously at one of our celebrations, I think. So this one's called Fairy Gifts, and it's relatively short, but I thought I need a story about gifts right now. So I was working on this one. So it generally happens that people's surroundings reflect more or less accurately their minds and dispositions. So perhaps that is why the flower fairy lived in a lovely palace with the most delightful garden you can imagine, full of flowers and trees and fountains and fish ponds and everything nice. For the fairy herself was so kind and charming that everybody loved her, and all the young princes and princesses who formed her court were as happy as the day was long, simply because they were near her. They came to her when they were quite tiny and never left her until they were grown up and had to go away into the great world. And when that time came, she gave to each whatever gift he asked her for. But it is chiefly of the Princess Sylvia that you're going to hear now. The fairy loved her with all her heart, for she was at once original and gentle, and she had nearly reached the age at which the gifts were generally bestowed. However, the fairy had a great wish to know how the other princesses who had grown up and left her were prospering, and before the time came for Sylvia to go herself, she resolved to send her to some of them. So one day, her chariot, drawn by butterflies, of course, was made ready, and the fairy said, "Sylvia, I'm going to send you to the court of Iris. She will receive you with pleasure for my sake, as well as for your own. In 2 months, you may come back to me again, and I shall expect you to tell me what you think of her." Sylvia was very unwilling to go away, but as the fairy wished it, she said nothing. Only when the 2 months were over, she stepped joyfully into the butterfly chariot and could not get back quickly enough to the flower fairy, who, for her part, was equally delighted to see her again. "Now, child," she said, "tell me what impressions you have received." "You sent me, madam," answered Sylvia, "to the court of Iris, on whom you had bestowed the gift of beauty. She never tells anyone, however, that it was your gift, though she often speaks of your kindness in general. It seemed to me that her loveliness, which fairy dazzled me at first, had absolutely deprived her of the use of any of her other gifts or graces. In allowing herself to be seen, she appeared to think that she was doing all that could possibly be required of her. But unfortunately, while I was still with her, she became seriously ill, and though she presently recovered, her beauty is entirely gone, so that she hates the very sight of herself and is in despair. She entreated me to tell you what had happened and to beg you, in pity, to give her beauty back to her. And indeed, she does need it terribly, for all the things in her that were tolerable and even agreeable when she was so pretty seem quite different now, now that she is ugly. And it is so long since she thought of using her mind or her natural cleverness that I really don't think she has any left now. She's quite aware of all this herself, so you may imagine how unhappy she is and how earnestly she begs for your aid." "You have told me what I wanted to know," cried the fairy, "but alas, I cannot help her. My gifts can be given but once." Some time passed in all the usual delights of the flower fairy's palace, and then she sent for Sylvia again and told her she was to stay for a little while with the Princess Daphne. And accordingly, the butterflies whisked her off and set her down in a quite strange kingdom. But she had only been there for a very little time before a wandering butterfly brought a message from her to the fairy, begging that she might be sent for as soon as possible. And before very long, she was allowed to return. "Ah, madam," cried she, "what a place you sent me to that time." "Why, what is the matter?" asked the fairy. "Daphne was one of the princesses who asked for the gift of eloquence, if I remember rightly." "And very ill the gift of eloquence becomes a woman," replied Sylvia with an air of conviction. "It is true that she speaks well and her expressions are well chosen, but then she never leaves off talking. And though at first one may be amused, one ends up being wearied to death. Above all things, she loves any assembly for settling the affairs of her kingdom, for on those occasions she can talk and talk without fear of interruption. But even then, the moment is over, she is ready to begin again about anything or nothing, as the case may be. Oh, how glad I was to come away, I cannot tell you." The fairy smiled at Sylvia, unfeigned disgust at her late experience. But after allowing her a little time to recover, she sent her to the court of the Princess Cynthia, where she left her for 3 months. At the end of that time, Sylvia came back to her with all the joy and contentment that one feels at being once more beside a dear friend. The fairy, as usual, was anxious to hear what she thought of Cynthia, who had always been amiable and to whom she had given the gift of pleasing. I thought at first, said Sylvia, that she must be the happiest princess in the world. She had 1,000 lovers who vied with one another in their efforts to please and gratify her. Indeed, I had nearly decided that I would ask for a similar gift. Have you altered your mind then? Interrupted the fairy. Oh, yes, indeed, madam, replied Sylvia, and I will tell you why. The longer I stayed, the more I saw that Cynthia was not really happy. In her desire to please everyone, she ceased to be sincere and degenerated into a mere coquette. And even her lovers felt that the charms and fascinations which were exercised upon all who approached her without distinction were valueless, so that in the end, they ceased to care for them and went away disdainfully. I am pleased with you, child, said the fairy. Enjoy yourself here for a while, and presently you shall go to Philidia. Sylvia was glad to have leisure to think, for she could not make up her mind at all what she should ask for herself, and the time was drawing very near. However, before very long, the fairy sent her to Philidia and waited for her to report with unabated interest. I reached her court safely, said Sylvia, and she received me with much kindness and immediately began to exercise upon me that brilliant wit which you had bestowed upon her. I confess that I was fascinated by it, and for a week thought that nothing could be more desirable. The time passed like magic. So great was the charm of her society. But I ended by ceasing to covet that gift more than any of the others I have seen. For like the gift of pleasing, it cannot really give satisfaction. By degrees, I wearied of what had so delighted me at first, especially as I perceived more and more plainly that it was impossible to be constantly smart and amusing without being frequently ill-natured and too apt to turn all things, even the most serious, into mere occasion for a brilliant jest. The fairy in her heart agreed with Sylvia's conclusion and felt pleased with herself for having brought her up so well. But now the time was come for Sylvia to receive her gift, and all her companions were assembled. The fairy stood in the midst and in the usual manner asked what she would take with her into the great world. Sylvia paused for a moment and then answered, a quiet spirit. And the fairy granted her request. This lovely gift makes life a constant happiness to its possessor and to all who are brought into contact with her. She has all the beauty of gentleness and contentment in her sweet face, and if at times it seems less lovely through some chance grief or disquietude, the hardest thing that one ever hears is, Sylvia's dear face is pale today. It grieves one to see her so. And when, on the contrary, she is gay and joyful, the sunshine of her presence rejoices all who have the happiness of being near her.
All right, that's great, Adrian. And that story made me think, are you going to be part of the SAC genre on fairy tales? I nominated you.
Oh, I plan to be. Am I supposed to do something else besides go in and sign up or something?
Well,
Or am I waiting?
you should have heard from the person. Maybe he had too many people apply. I'll
Oh,
have to go back and look at the email.
okay.
I know he replied that he received it.
Okay.
But yeah, you should have, I think, and unless maybe they haven't made the decision yet.
They might not have, because I think they're still working out next, what is it, next week's,
Yeah, May 19th, Ron Evans is going to be in the program.
yeah, so maybe once that's done, they'll have the decisions on the next one. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll go and check the SAC site and see if there's anything else I'm supposed to do. But thank you.
You're welcome. And
Yeah.
Ron asked me if there was a time limit for the stories, and I wasn't able to tell him that. The guy
Okay.
in charge didn't give that information to me. Maybe it's on the website somewhere, but anyway.
Yeah, I'll double check, but I'm pretty good about editing down stuff if I need to for time's sake. So I'll
Yeah.
work with whatever time frame they give me. But
Yeah.
yeah, if you want to double check on that, that'd be awesome because I would really look forward to participating in June.
And another interesting fact, this book, oh, it doesn't show with the background, does it?
No, no, what's it called?
So this is Celtic Fairy Tales, illustrated by Isabel Brent and retold by Neil Phillip. Guess what story I found in here? One that you have told before.
Oh, which one?
Fair, Brown, and Trembling.
And Trembling, yeah, that's the one I want to do in June, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's
That
in
is-
this book.
That is the Celtic Cinderella, and it is all about the clothes.
Yeah, it's a great one. So that's the one you
Okay.
would like to tell, huh?
Yeah, that's the one I plan to tell because that seems to be a big hit with people.
Yeah.
So, okay,
Well,
cool.
I hope they give you plenty of time because that's a fairly long story.
Well, it is, if that's why I always stop the story at the point where she meets the prince and and the shoe fits and all that stuff, and then I say, and the Celtic version of this goes on and includes a whale, a cowboy, and a silver bullet and 14 children, but that's a story for another time. So
Yeah.
I edit the story right there and cut that sucker in half.
Yeah. Probably a good idea.
Yeah. So then it's not nearly as long, and then I edit other parts of it down. I have a working edited script that's edited way down. So
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So hopefully I'll cross my fingers and toes, and hopefully I'll be able to
Will be chosen to be one of the tellers.
Yay. Okay. Thanks.
So I think that's all of our stories for tonight. Any announcements, Nick, that you want to share with us?
Not specifically tonight, but the Folkworks people who have been very supportive of storytelling finally got their new website up and running. And so they kind of want me to nudge storytelling events onto their calendar. So I will be attempting to do that over the next couple of months and see how that works for them. So as I try that, we'll see, because I have not worked with their new website yet. They think it's going to be really easy to enter stuff, which of course never actually works, but
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Okay. And I can't think of any announcements. Well, Adrian, you missed, but I guess I already told you, Ron Evans is going to be in the May 19th. Is that, I forget the title of the genre.
Well, isn't that the historical one?
Yeah, is Fables both real and imagined or something like that?
Yeah.
Historical events or something like
Now,
that.
are these going to be archived on the SAC website?
Yes, they will record it. They have, you can go back and look at the SAC YouTube channel and see the past genre concerts.
Good, because I wanted to actually see them. It's just that with my schedule, there was no telling whether I would be able to perform in one of these ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to listen to Ron because on the same night, at the same time, I'm hosting a Zoom meeting for Sierra Club because I've been doing these trail talk sessions. And this week, or this month, next week, the topic is the Bighorn Mine by Wrightwood, which was the biggest mining operation in the San Gabriel mountain range.
Yeah, that was the guy who was the Civil War veteran who
Yes.
helped start that. Right. Yeah, that looks like a really interesting story.
Yeah, well, it will be recorded. And I'm one of the administrators on the Sierra Club, the San Gorgonio chapter YouTube channel. So I'll be recording that and posting that on.
Oh, please let me know where that can be seen, because I really want to see that story.
Yeah.
Yeah, send that around. That would be great. And next week's SAC event's called Legends, Urban and Traditional.
That's what it is. Legends. Yeah. Not fables, but legends. Okay, well, I guess that's it, Miss, unless anybody else has news to share or announcements to make. Thank you all for coming.
All right. Good night.
Good to see you guys.
Yep. Good night.
Thank you for making it happen.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. And I will post the video on the YouTube channel maybe tonight.
Okay.
I get around to it. All right. Bye-bye.